Hello and welcome to the GreenTruth podcast by TiiQu, your go-to destination for insightful conversations on sustainability. We're committed to delving into diverse perspectives on environmental issues, guided by the belief that embracing truth empowers us to create a better world for generations to come.
So my name is Comfort and I'm your host today for the GreenTruth podcast. And today we would like to welcome Kathleen Draper, who is the director at the Carbon Standards International. She is a board member of the US Biochar Initiative and has conducted extensive research on biochar and its uses. And this is what we will be talking about today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us about biochar and what it is?
I can. I like to describe biochar as burnt toast to give you a visual. So you can take almost any kind of organic matter, put it in an oxygen-starved environment like an oven, and turn up the temperature, and what do you get at the end? You get this black stuff. And it turns out that when you put that black stuff into the soil, microbes do not degrade it, which is what would normally happen to the organic material in the natural decomposition process. So you're able to convert up to half of the carbon that was absorbed during the plant's life cycle into a long-lasting carbon. And that's how you are helping to rebalance atmospheric carbon with biochar.
Oh, okay. So where would this be used? Who might need to use biochar?
Well, the process of making biochar has been around for thousands of years. It's been found in many indigenous cultures, the most popular of which is in the Amazon. It seems like they used it as both a cooking technique and probably a waste management technique. And they ended up creating these highly fertile soils, which led to huge populations in an area that didn't naturally have fertile soils. So we've also seen it used in Asia and in Europe. So it's been around for a long time. And the main focus up till recently has been on using it in soils as a soil amendment. It's not really a fertilizer on its own, but it can help with water management, nutrient management, and things like that.
So can it help in making the soil a lot healthier than what it is?
It can. And not all soils need biochar, but particularly in the South, where the soils don't have a high carbon content, using something like biochar can be very helpful in making the soils more resilient and healthier.
Would you say that increases maybe the fertility of the soils in terms of like growing crops? Does it help farmers in a way to get more produce, or what do you think the benefits of what you've described is?
It can help with yield improvement. Doesn't always. Again, it sort of depends on what the constraints are in your soils. So as an example, out in California, drought is often a problem. And if you have biochar in your soils, it can retain water longer. It can, in other soils that have contaminants like heavy metals, it can immobilize those. So not only is your food probably the capacity of the soil is going to increase, but it's also going to improve the quality of the food as well.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting. So is it simply a process of digging a hole and putting it into the ground, or how does it work?
Well, generally speaking, you want to add some nutrients to the biochar itself. If you put it in the soil on its own, it tends to act like a sponge and it will absorb nutrients, which is not normally something you want because the crops need that. So generally people will combine it with compost or manure or even a sort of effluent stream that has nutrients in it. Some people are putting it in lakes that have too much phosphorus and nitrogen to absorb some of that and then use that on soils. So it then becomes a slow release fertilizer when you've added those nutrients.
Okay, that's interesting. Would you be able to sort of differentiate the difference between biochar and charcoal? Because of when one thinks of burning something, you get the off product, which is charcoal. But I'm guessing that's not as useful as what you're describing.
Well, I like to call them the carbon cousins, and they all look the same, whether it's charcoal or biochar or activated carbon. Um, there are some nuances, not just the end use, but with charcoal, you tend to just want to burn off the water so that you have as much energy in it as possible. So you use relatively low temperatures to do that. It's usually called torrefaction. With biochar, you want higher temperatures to create more pore space and activate it in different ways than you would normally with charcoal. But at the end of the day, we are trying to disrupt the carbon cycle with biochar. So the end use is really important. And if you're selling it to the steel industry, who is trying to decarbonize away from fossil fuels, that we would consider charcoal and not biochar. It's only considered biochar when it's put in a long lasting situation, whether that's soils or oil wells or concrete.
Mm. So it's a little bit more of a process in order to make make it usable and make it more a little bit more valuable.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I should say that even though they all look the same, biochars are very, very different depending on what they're made from, what the temperature is that they're cooked at. So they have very different chemical properties, physical properties, electromagnetic properties. So just because it's called biochar doesn't mean it's all the same thing. They're quite different. And it's important to know that because you want to use the right biochar for the right soils and the right
Oh,
end goals.
okay. All right. Cool. So thank you. Thanks. That's really interesting. So I would like to know more about the people who are currently using biochar. So well, I'm guessing it's farmers, is it agriculture? Like which industries are currently using biochar?
Agriculture is a big one. And up until recently, the price of biochar and the availability of biochar was it was a high price and it wasn't easily available, and it can be expensive to ship it around. So you would see farmers that had perennial agriculture, high value crops. Now, because you can get a decent amount of money for carbon credits related to biochar, the price of the biochar has dropped. The amount of biochar being produced is soaring. So we're seeing it more widespread within the farming community. You can use it on crops that don't have as much value as vineyards and orchards and things like that.
Oh, okay. So can you give me an example? So such as what? What
Corn,
sort of?
yeah,
Oh, like corn, wheat, all the grains and things like
cotton,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now it can make more sense. And in the U.S., the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service is really promoting biochar, and they even have what's called Code 336, the Soil Carbon Amendment Protocol, which is paying farmers to build soil carbon using either biochar or compost or a combination of the two.
Mm, No, that's very good. Okay. So I think I'd like to talk a bit about biochar and still stay on topic of agriculture. In terms of manure management, methane emissions, so the other benefits that maybe farmers might realize, which will make them maybe adopt biochar.
We're starting to see more carbonization of manure, especially in large scale operations. And the benefit there is, well, the amount, the quantity of the manure is minimized very quickly as compared to other methods such as lagoons and even digesters. So that's important. And the methane
Mm,
emitted during either of those handling processes is eliminated as well. So we're seeing that as a way for farmers to move towards different manure management processes, but also we're seeing that uh, they are using biochar in composting their manure, and we found certain research has shown that that can reduce methane emissions by up to 80%, which is great. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any protocols right now for them to get compensated for the methane reduction. And I hope to see that sort of thing coming out in the very near future, because I think that will help more farmers adopt more climate friendly manure management strategies.
How is it doing that? How does it, get rid of the methane? How does it
Oh,
work?
that's a technical question, which might be a bit beyond my pay grade, but it has something that enables microbes to help degrade the methane production in the compost
Mm,
piles.
mm,
We're also seeing in the US anyway that compost industry is very interested in biochar because it can help keep the piles hotter. It can reduce the number of days until the compost is ready. It provides a longer lasting carbon, and it can immobilize certain toxins that are persistent in manures like herbicides and pesticides, which is problematic if it's still retained in the compost. It can be detrimental to whatever you're putting the compost on. So they are very interested and have done some interesting research on combining the two, biochar and compost, to mitigate that problem.
mm, mm. Okay. Can you tell us more about your work that you do with the US Biochar Initiative? What are your aims? What are your aims with that?
Yeah, I've been a board member for, gosh, probably 8 or 9 years now. And their main focus these days is creating demand for the biochar itself. We have hosted annual uh, conferences as well. I think we had over 600 people last year, hoping to have over 1,000 next year in Minneapolis. So we're really about educating potential consumers and markets about the benefits of biochar to create that demand so we can help further scale the industry.
Is it just in America where this movement is happening, or is it scalable across other countries? Is it global?
It's very global.
Okay.
I think Europe has been ahead of the US in some ways for a while, but the US is really starting to scale. I think part of that is because of the USDA support for biochar, but you're starting to see it in large plantations in Indonesia, and Brazil has some really interesting biochar projects in the coffee industry. So we're seeing it booming all over. Even in Africa, I've spoken to so many people that they have this invasive species that they're trying to eradicate. And if you turn it into biochar and can monetize those credits, it's one way to not only recover the land, but create job opportunities in rural economies. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned carbon credits and monetization, which is a big thing. So, looking at it from maybe sort of a corporate and sort of work business related aspect, that's something that a lot of organizations try to do, sort of with their offsetting and strategies and things like that. Would you be able to talk to me more about how it works, offsetting and sort of the carbon credits and that whole industry?
Sure. So in the biochar world, we've only been able to monetize the carbon credits since about 2018 or 2019. But now there's at least four different methodologies available to buyers. And we are seeing the demand growing. And biochar, compared to other carbon dioxide removal strategies, is delivering, I think last year was over 90% of purchased and delivered carbon came from biochar. And the price per ton of CO2e for a biochar purchase is about $120 to $180, which when you convert that back into biochar, dry tons of biochar, it's either double or triple that, depending on the whole carbon efficiency of producing that biochar, where you're getting the feedstock, how far it's traveling, what the efficiency of the machine is, if you're using the excess heat, and where it's eventually going to be put in the soil or some other geological storage.
Okay. If you could just elaborate on that sort of process that you mentioned just there about the feed and all of that. So tell me a little bit more about the process I'm guessing what you've just described very quickly was biochar creation.
Right. So, as I said, you can make biochar out of all sorts of different organic materials, from sewage sludge to wood waste to crop residues. I think the most interesting one I've seen, I have quite a collection, was made from diapers that were from bamboo. uh,
Oh.
so depending on where you're getting that feedstock, whether it's specifically grown for biochar feedstock, which doesn't happen a lot yet, but it may in the future. You have to look at, was there fertilizer used to grow the feedstock, or was there, gas used to transport the feedstock to the production center? And then, depending on what technology you're using, it may be that it's not just the biochar you're getting out of it, but you have excess heat, which is displacing fossil fuel heat. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration to calculate, for lack of a better word, the carbon efficiency of this operation. And so that's why I said when you convert back from a ton of CO2e to a dry ton of biochar, all of that is calculated, and it can be anywhere from the carbon to carbon dioxide conversion is 3.67, but we normally see a conversion efficiency of between 2.0 and 3.0. So it's a pretty carbon negative process.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. All right, very good. So how profitable would you say biochar is in terms of those people who are creating it?
It's all across the map, to be honest with you. I think right now there's a lot of people entering into these projects solely for the carbon credits, which I find a little dangerous. I think we need to value all the other co-products. The biochar, people should understand that it has value. Same thing with other potential co-products like heat, which could be turned into electricity. But there are others as well, like bio oil. Some people are sequestering that bio oil, which is great if you live in the right geology. And there's another product called wood vinegar. Not all production technologies produce all of these. So again, it depends on what you're interested in. But if you're just focusing on the carbon credits, I think I don't think it's a resilient business model, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. I think what's interesting is the word bio seems to be all natural ingredients. So where you said nappies just then, nappies, but the bamboo sort of nappies. So the waste that sort of we produce on a day-to-day basis, which has, plastic in it and such, that cannot be used as biochar material, I
If you had
assume.
asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said no, it can't. But what's
Oh,
emerging is that there are technologies to assess what fraction of the municipal solid waste stream is from organic sources, and
okay.
and what is not. And so I think we will soon see the day when you know part of that can be, well, all of it can be pyrolyzed. That we've been pyrolyzing tires forever, but that's not called biochar. But with municipal solid waste, sometimes that's the most efficient way to deal with that waste stream, but only part of it would be considered biochar. And you might put that sort of thing in concrete or in asphalt or things like that, because it's not going to be a very consistent biochar. And so for many things and uses, you want a very consistent biochar.
So it's basically about disrupting the current waste management processes, I would say, and
Yeah.
kind of sort of digging into how resources are used. I'm just going to use like a simple example where you have like and this is a simple example that I have where I work, where you have a bin, and rather than having lots of bins, it's called a resource extraction bin, where all of it goes into one, and then you kind of dig into it and see what can be used from that. I mean, if that was done on a larger scale in terms of how waste is managed, then I'm guessing that biochar could be maybe more readily available, more abundant, that sort of thing. Is that maybe something that could be done in the future, or something that needs to be worked on?
I see no reason why it couldn't happen. I have my own charables waste stream, so that whenever I
Oh,
make my own biochar, that's what I'll use to get the fire started.
tell me about that, because that is something that we can easily, well, I say easily. Tell me about it first, and I'll tell you how easy it is.
Well, it's anything that is clean burnable. So it's nuts, shells, it's cardboard, it's paper. So yeah, anything like that. I keep it outside of. Some of it I recycle. If it's clean, but if it's not, then I'll just put it in my bin for the next time I make biochar, which is
Mm,
very easy to do in your backyard if you don't live in a city.
mm.
Um, that's one of the nice things about
Yeah, I think we have things like, and we just call it composting, where you get your old food and your food waste in your house, so you put it in your composting bin, add a few things to it, and give it a quick stir, and then you have maybe biochar or some sort of fertilizer or something that can be used and is environmentally friendly. So yeah, I guess it is something that is easily done at home. So is there anything that you have to add to it specifically in your back garden to make it into biochar?
I either put it in my compost or I do have, a kind of porta potty that you can add things to. And then that puts some nitrogen into the biochar. So, yeah.
Sounds good. So I do feel like if there was simple education and knowledge freely available about this stuff, it could be something that people just do at home and it becomes normal. Because I would say like recycling has become second nature and normal. So why couldn't this be?
It's interesting in cities like Stockholm, many years ago, they got a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation to put in a small demo for their green waste in the city. And they very much used it as a way to educate residents in the city about biochar. So, if they bring in their tree debris, they could take home a certain amount of biochar and use it in their compost or whatever. And I think that's a great way to get people involved in the process and interested and educated. And Bloomberg has now funded, I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 cities across the globe to do a similar thing, which I think is what we need to see much more of, these demo projects.
Yeah, that's true. So um, one thing I was wondering is how is biochar told to people? I mean, are people aware of it? I mean, I hadn't heard of it. Like I said, I haven't heard of it. So are people aware of it? Are there things that can be done to make people more aware of it?
So I've been in the biochar industry for 13 years now. And when I first started, I would say 99.99% of the people had never heard of it. I think we're down to probably 98% now. But it really depends on the circles that you're traveling in. I mean, in my everyday life, nobody's ever heard of it. I live in rural upstate New York. But then I talked to my extension agent, who's a biochar person, and she tells me farmers are hearing about it, whether that's through the USDA program or what, because it can solve some of the problems they are experiencing, partially because of climate change. And in at COP, you'll hear it talked about, but it's still not getting as much attention as I think it deserves.
Mm,
For something that is market ready, it's
yeah.
happening all over, but
Mm.
it's
So is it
surprisingly
market
still.
ready and scalable?
It
Because
is,
I think
yeah.
that's where the profit is, isn't it? And let's be honest, it's all about if it sells, then it makes sense to farmers. If you're trying to get people to adopt something, is it scalable? So it's market ready. Would you say it's scalable as well?
It's scalable. I think the issue is still farmers are a conservative group in general, and this is a permanent addition to their soil. So they need to know that this is going to be good, not just this year, but for the long term. They need to be assured that this is going to have a positive benefit beyond just carbon sequestration, or they're not going to adopt it. And so I think we still have a lot of educating to do of different
Mm.
types of farmers and other end users.
Yeah, that's I think that's a key point because once it's there, it's permanent. So if is there like is there the risk that it doesn't work or it has detrimental effects on a farmer's crop? Would you say that's an issue?
So what I will say is that all biochars look the same. And not all biochars are good biochars for certain scenarios. So I think you need to understand what your soil constraint is and what kind of biochar can help with that. And there's a really great project going on in the US funded by the USDA called the Biochar Atlas. And what that's doing is mapping our soil maps with specific commercially available biochars and saying, okay, you have a lack of, let's say, water holding capacity in these soils, or your carbon is really low. These are the kind of biochars and the properties of biochars that you should be looking at. So it's an objective party. They're offering to test any commercial biochar from the U.S. for free. I think it is a really great way to ensure trust and provide education to farmers.
So and potentially jobs, soil analysis, soil analysts, helping to educate farmers about their soil and what the components are. So
Yep.
there's also that side. I didn't realize that was so that's interesting, because then you can't really just pick up biochar off the shelf because it may not actually be right for your soil.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And some soils don't need it. If you're an organic farmer that has fantastic soils, there's not a whole lot of reason to put biochar in your soils, in good soils.
Except
But
for the sustainability benefits, maybe, would you say?
of course, yes. But then it becomes is the value you're getting worth the cost you're paying? But where we see it is where there's super dry areas or very low carbon, and those farmers are suffering. They're not very resilient. And so they should be adding carbon in the form of biochar and compost and manure and everything.
Mm.
It's the nice thing about biochar is that it's longer lasting than some of these others, but the others have things that are also valuable for the soil.
I just want to hop back to a point you said about COP and how it's mentioned there but not really pushed. So, COP gathers all of these, influential governments together. What would you say to them in terms of biochar?
Get it on your national decarbonization plans, because I
Mm.
think there might be one or two countries in the world. I want to say Denmark is one of them, and Cameroon uh, was one of the first to put it on their decarbonization plans, because it has the potential to enable you to be more ambitious, which we need people and countries to be, because it's so far off their radar, they don't even know it's a possibility. And yeah.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think because I've like I said, I haven't heard of it, but now the potential opportunities, if it's on people's plans and strategies, and their decarbonisation strategies that they may have, I feel like it'll be a real opportunity for innovation, and other businesses to come forward and realise that this is something that needs to be done.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, half the time, why do they have that meeting in COP anyway? What am I saying? Why are you having this meeting? Because I would like to see these sorts of things pushed to the front of their agenda. It's really quite important.
Yes, I totally agree.
So would you say that there are any countries that are sort of leading the way at the forefront of this? Is it US only, or
Oh
which
no.
country would you say is doing the most?
I always uh, think that Sweden is ahead. They've been
Ah,
at this for a long time. I think they have a very methodical approach. Scandinavia in general, I think, is taking a very solid approach to biochar. And the U.S. we're getting there, but I think it was much bigger in the Pacific Northwest in California than it has been where I live on the East Coast. But we're getting there, and I honestly think the carbon markets are a big part of the reason why.
yeah. Okay, so I want to talk something about a little bit more about how versatile biochar might be, because I think we've really mentioned and like delved deeply into like the agriculture, the farming uses, but what else might biochar be used for?
Lots and lots of things. I co-authored a book about 5 years ago called "Burn: Using Fire to Cool the Earth," and Albert Bates and I talked about all these different non-agricultural uses. and they're just exploding. It's phenomenal to see. I love it. So whereas it's, putting it in soils for agriculture is one, we're now seeing people talk about putting it in old abandoned oil wells and mines and things like that. But on the products side, we're seeing a lot of interest in putting it in things like concrete and asphalt. And I worked on a project to put it in drywall. And I know you can't see, but here's my wall that has biochar plaster in it.
Wow. And
So
does it work as a good insulator, or what are the benefits of doing that?
beyond being beautiful,
Mm,
um,
it's a lovely wall. It's a lovely
yes.
wall, might I add.
Well, there's several. I think a little bit more research is needed, but it has been shown to have humidity control properties. It can have electromagnetic shielding properties as well. With concrete, it can help the curing process to go faster. In the right recipes with the right kind of biochar, it can help make it improve some of the properties. With asphalt, they're saying that it can extend the life of the asphalt. So again, there's certain recipes that are showing promise beyond just sequestering carbon.
Oh, okay. So you would say it's a little bit in the experimental stage at the moment?
Some of it's being commercialized. I mean, the amount of biochar in asphalt in the US is ready to explode. They're just looking for the right price of the biochar and the carbon credits. But I think part of it is that I don't know if you know what an environmental product declaration is, but more and more builders and architects are looking at the climate impact. It's not just carbon, but it's water and all of that. And so they want to get away from these high embodied carbon materials, and
Mm,
biochar is one way to do that. So
mm,
there's been a lot of interest. I think most recently there's a global company that's putting it in ceiling tiles. So
mm.
that's kind of
Yeah, so
cool.
that's so basically, I mean, no, I haven't heard of the thing that you just mentioned, but I do think that, building companies, all sorts of organizations may have it in their sustainability plan to be able to
Mhm.
report on how they are making their products more sustainable.
Yep.
So that would basically be, at the most simplest terms, put it in an ESG strategy, and then, there you are, sort of making sure that the products that you are using have that environmental factor. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like that's quite good.
Yeah, I put a ton of it in my septic system a few years ago because I live near a lake. And when I understood the process of what a septic system looks like and how it's built, I thought this is a good place and use for biochar to help,
Mm,
contain any contaminants that might come
mm,
out of my house. So
mm. So do you know anything about the uptake in the UK where I am at the moment? Because it's something that's quite popular as well.
it's actually interesting to see what's happening in the UK. There's a number of new biochar production facilities that are being announced. I was
Mm,
in Ireland last year, and same thing there. I mean, for such a small country, they had at least four production scenarios within a couple hour drive. So I think it is starting to happen. I was talking last week to a friend of mine from the UK in the biochar industry, and he was saying there's growing demand for biochar to be used in the built environment there, which is what we need. We need the demand for the product, and then I think scaling will happen a lot faster
yeah,
than it already
yeah.
is.
Yeah, definitely. My final question, I would say, what are some of the things that you've personally done to spread the word about this amazing, what sounds to be amazing, versatile, almost fundamental product of biochar? What have you been doing to spread the word about it?
Yeah, so I've co-authored a few books about it. I'm hoping to do one more about the process of building my house and using biochar and other carbon sequestering materials as much as
Wow, I
possible.
feel that's a podcast in itself.
Yes, it was
Amazing.
a big learning experience for me, and I had to learn how to persuade all sorts of people to use new materials, but it was fun
Wow.
and educational. Yeah, but so I've published. I write a blog, which is a very casual blog about some of my fantasies for how biochar could be used in the future, and interestingly, some of them have led somewhere. So that's been fun. But yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots to share and there's lots to get out there. So it's amazing that you're on this podcast. So to the listeners of this podcast, what do we need to go and do next in terms of, biochar and using it? What would you
There's
suggest?
some great fundamental educational materials on the U.S. Biochar Initiative's website. So I would say if you're interested, there's a huge amount of webinars out there. It's a little bit overwhelming at times, but get a baseline, and it's a great community to be a part of. Very positive. And then next year, if you happen to be in Minneapolis in September, I think we'll be hosting the next Biochar conference. So
There's a biochar conference. Of course
yeah,
there is. That's
of course.
amazing. That is amazing. And I feel like that's a nice segue that we with the creation of these podcasts, with TiiQu, we're hoping to have a big virtual TiiQu conference where we get speakers to come and create these communities around these topics as well. So yeah, it's always important to have conferences to allow people to come and sort of share and knowledge exchange. That's amazing that there's a whole biochar conference. When is that happening?
Yeah, Minneapolis. And I have led 4 or 5 different study tours, specifically taking people to biochar production facilities to educate them on how it all works and looks like and all of that. So I don't have one lined up next, but that's also a way. The International Biochar Initiative has one in Italy in October this year. So if people want to attend that, that's out there too.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, amazing. Okay. Well, Kathleen, I can only thank you for opening my eyes and enlightening me to the many opportunities that biochar affords us. Yeah, it's been great and really, really insightful. So, yeah, I would encourage anyone listening to obviously read your books, educate yourself, and also adopt a new way of working, not just farming, but a whole range of opportunities and versatile materials that are out there using biochar. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Green Truth podcast. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and inspiring. Remember, it's through understanding truth and action that we can pave the way for a sustainable future. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking conversations, and don't forget to leave us a review. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth.